Okay, everyone, thanks for joining us. This is Phil Rosengren with BetterPitching.com, and today's presentation is all about understanding the college recruiting process. And I'm going to introduce our guest presenter in a minute, but first I just wanted to say thank you to everyone for sending in all of your questions. This is clearly a hot topic for a lot of parents and pitchers out there, and I think you're going to get a lot out of this presentation tonight. So today I'm very excited to have with us a true authority when it comes to college baseball recruiting, Justin Cron. Justin, thanks for joining us.
Thanks a lot, Phil. Great to be here, and really appreciate you having me on. Always good to be associated with organizations that get it, like BetterPitching.com. So happy to be here.
Awesome, appreciate it. And for those of you who don't know him, Justin is the founder of Diamond College Advisory Team, or DCAT, and DCAT is the premier national college advisory program for high school student athletes and their families. He has given these presentations and seminars around the country, and today he's going to go through this presentation here, really giving you guys a good understanding of the recruiting process, and then we'll get into the Q&A at the end, and he'll address your questions. We're going to try to keep it to an hour, a little under an hour, so hopefully we can get to all of your questions, but if we don't, you can follow up with me or Justin directly, and we'll be sure to get to them in any future webinars we do. Okay, so with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to Justin. Justin, go ahead and take it away.
Awesome. Thanks, Phil. Well, let me start very quickly by giving some shape and some background to the discussion, starting with my background in my career and basically how Diamond College Advisory Team, i.e. DCAT, came to be. Essentially, to make a long story short, I went to Amherst College, graduated in 1997, played baseball there, went on to coach at Amherst. After that, I got my master's in sport management, then went on to Boston College, was the recruiting coordinator there for a year in '99. Went from there to UNC Asheville, Division I in North Carolina, as a recruiting coordinator for another year, and then was hired as a head coach at Shenandoah University, a small Division III school in Northern Virginia, for 3 years. After that, I essentially went on to work at Head First Baseball, which many of you guys have probably heard about, in Washington, D.C. for over 6 years, where I was basically hired to start this college advising program. The owner of Head First, Brendan Sullivan, sat me down and he said, look, I have this idea of having a college placement program, but I don't really know what I want it to be. Are you interested? And I said, absolutely. Would love to do it as long as, I can hold to a certain philosophy as I organize and run this program. We'll talk a little bit more about that philosophy a little bit later. But my job was essentially to start this program and to coach various travel teams and help with their honor roll camps. So after 6 years, long story short, wanted to move to South Carolina to be closer to family. So Brennan said, hey, why don't you just go own your own company, which became DCAT. And so for a little over 2 years, I've been doing my own thing in South Carolina, working with kids all over the country, as DCAT is a national program. So essentially went from college coaching for 6 years, did the college advising for 6 at Head First, and now over 2 down here. So I've been doing college advising, and coaching, for the last decade or so. So in terms of DCAT, first, very quickly, what it does, I'll talk about briefly, and then talk briefly about the mission, so that you guys have some understanding before we get into the nuts and bolts of the presentation, which is what you care the most about. But just so you understand it, DCAT reduces the information gap between college admissions offices, athletic programs, and the high school student athletes who will eventually sustain their programs. Okay, so the mission or the goal is really to help every student maximize his or her options. We also do softball for a great college experience both on and off the field. Okay, so in terms of some of the things that are important with regards to DCAT, what it is and what it isn't. All right, first of all, DCAT, as you see on your screen, is I set this program up not to be a college placement, not to be a recruiting or scouting service. because quite frankly, as a college coach, I absolutely despise them. Most of the time I'd get stuff from the baseball factory or National Scouting Bureau or whatever it was, letters that weren't personalized with big pictures of kids, and those things would go in the trash because I had no way of knowing whether or not the kid was actually interested in my my program or not. So when I started DCAT, I wanted to make a program that basically went in a completely opposite direction of any recruiting services. And by that I mean this. Recruiting services typically will charge a fee and basically say, hey, you work with us, everything's taken care of. You don't have to do any work. We'll do your mailings, we'll write your letters, we'll send your videos, we'll do all this stuff. The problem with that is that it's a self-defeating philosophy because most college coaches want to hear directly from the player, the student athlete that they're recruiting. Okay, so beyond the NCAA rules issues with certain recruiting services, the most important component for me is that having been a college coach, I knew what I wanted to recruit, I knew what I liked, and I knew what I didn't like. And one of the things that I liked and what most coaches like is for kids to take the reins of their process, to take ownership. Okay, so they kids that call, kids that email, kids that reach out without mom and dad doing it, without Justin doing it, without whoever doing it for them, automatically is a plus in that recruits column. Okay, that's not to say if a high school coach or, you know, someone that knows a specific college coach really well and they have a trusting relationship, if that coach or person were to recommend a kid, that can be valuable sometimes. But the point here is that DCAT is about teaching kids how to do it for themselves so that they can really shine in the best light possible to the college coaches. I always tell kids, I'm going to help you understand how to do the things that you need to do so that coaches are more likely to recruit you, because a lot of kids make the mistake of thinking, you know, if I'm good enough, it'll just happen. Ability is only a small part. It isn't a very important part, but it's a small part of what it actually takes to get on to play at the next level, as we'll talk about a little bit later on. So DCAT, in short, you know, I'm not interested in selling kids to schools. Me and my advisors do not act as agents or representatives for kids. I like to be behind the scenes, and I like to teach kids how to do what they need to do in the process, how to do, what to do, and why to do, all the different things that they're going to encounter throughout the recruiting process that will ultimately help them maximize their college options. Another couple reasons that DCAT is very different than your typical college placement scouting recruiting service is that I require an application for DCAT. We actually reject about 30% of interested clients, and admission is not automatic just because the client is willing to pay a fee. I take very seriously who we work with. First and foremost, a player must have college level ability or projectability at some level. They don't all have to be D1 studs, but they have to be able to play at some college level without stretching the bounds of imagination. Number two, they need to be motivated to work and to get after it. Again, I don't believe anything. I don't believe you get anything in this life for nothing, and I very much teach and coach that philosophy with the kids I work. That, you know, I've done a lot setting this program up. I will continue to do a lot helping those I advise, but at the end of the day, they're the ones who have to pull the trigger, and it's their road, and they have to learn how to excel and go, you know, basically become better than where they are as an athlete, as a student, in terms of their diet, their lifting, their training, every aspect of this process. Okay, so, and thirdly, they need to be realistic about their baseball and academic profile. You know, when I start working with a lot of kids, many think that they can play at Vanderbilt and Stanford and or get into schools like that, and less than 1% of the high school baseball playing population can actually go to places like that. So we always have to have a discussion, preliminary discussion, to kind of see, you know, where the student athlete's mind is at before we might take on a certain client. A couple other quick notes. DCAT really empowers, again, student athletes to maximize their chances of finding the best college match by giving them knowledge and tools they need to sell themselves to schools the right way. Again, it's not our job to sell, promote, advocate, etc., to college coaches. Okay, again, for reasons that we don't need to get into specifically on the NCAA side in this call, but simply put, DCAT works with ball players from every single corner of the country, from Washington to Florida, California to Maine, that project to play in college at some level. And we again take seriously who we work with. We have DCAT alumni. We're always asked, what schools do the kids that you work with generally go on to? Really, it's a huge range. Every Ivy, every NESCAC school is represented. We've had kids go into each of those programs. We've had them go into big-time programs like USC, San Diego State, UVA, TCU, Vanderbilt, and also schools that few people have ever heard of, like Limestone College, Juniata, or Mitchell. So what's important to us when we make a decision is essentially, that we're working with a kid who's willing to work and get better in all facets, of this process, and who's really going to be fun to work with, who's motivated to get after it. Because as a college coach, I didn't like to coach or work with kids that weren't motivated in general. So all that said, we're going to move on and start talking about the nuts and bolts of this process. First thing I want to do is share a couple facts with you that you see on your screen, and then more importantly go into why these two facts exist. First, as you see, many high school baseball players that have college-level ability or projectability. And what does projectability mean very quickly? If you're a sophomore, just starting your sophomore year, you've got a lot of physical growth left. Your ability is going to get maybe 5 times better by the time you graduate, and you might not be a college-level specimen right then at the start of the year, but if you have some skills in certain areas, a coach can project where you're going to be in a year and 2 years, et cetera. So I could say, all right, this sophomore clearly has the skills. If he projects, if he hones them, will be a college player at some level. But back to the fact, many high school players that have this college-level ability or projectability actually don't play college baseball, and their careers end prematurely. That is it's a crazy phenomenon, and I argue it exists more in the sport of baseball than any other sport in terms of high school to the college transition. And roughly, 11%, only 1 in 9 high school players who want to go on to play college baseball actually do so. So the obvious question here is why? Why are there so few high school players that go on to play at the next level? Well, there's a couple reasons. Number one, they simply aren't good enough. Anyone who tells you as a high school baseball player that you don't need to have talent to play in college is lying to you. That's a complete fallacy. As I mentioned earlier, though, that's only the tip of the iceberg. If you have the ability, that's great. If you don't, it's gonna be an uphill battle, and you might have to make it as a walk-on, et cetera. But quite simply, a lot of kids fall through the cracks because they aren't good enough. Number two, they don't understand the recruiting process. Okay, it's an overwhelming, often confusing thing to look out into this college recruiting process as a high school baseball player wanting to play in college. And not understanding it can derail a lot of them. What to do, when to do, how to do, why to do it. A lot of kids listen to their buddies or their buddies' parents in terms of when they should do what or what they should do with coaches. And a lot of times they don't get anywhere as a result. Number three, they don't apply to the right schools. We'll talk later on about college lists, but I see so many kids that have college-level ability not really know where their ability aligns in terms of the various levels out there. There's over 1,500 college programs when you add the NCAA, the NAIA, and junior college baseball, over 1,500 programs. That's a lot of programs, but again, a lot of kids apply just to their dream school and a couple others, or just to reach baseball schools, reach academic schools, and they don't create a college list wisely. So they don't apply to the right schools, they slip through the cracks. Number four, they don't prepare academically, athletically, and physically. So often I see kids I might start working with as a junior, and they go, man, if I'd only started my freshman year getting serious about my academics. And those C's freshman year, if they turn to B's and then A's sophomore, junior year, that's a great trend, but the C's don't go away in terms of the calculation of the GPA. So a lot of kids, that light bulb goes off a little late. The good news is it's not too late, but you also have to table your expectations. And again, align your academic and baseball profile with the college list that you put together. That right there is probably where most kids slip through the cracks, because their thought of where they can play or want to play or where they can get into or want to go is very different from the reality. Okay? They also don't prepare athletically and physically. Bottom line, high school kids, most of the time when I start working with a second half of the year sophomore or junior, they're physically way behind. They need 15 pounds yesterday, and they haven't necessarily really worked on their skills, in part because they don't necessarily know specifically what they need to work on. We'll talk more about that as we go through. Number 5, they don't, and again, another reason why kids that have college-level ability or projectability don't go on to play in college a lot of times is they don't promote themselves properly or proactively. Proactive is one of the key tenets of DCAT. I don't believe that this process works well for kids who aren't proactive. That's not to say if you don't have DCAT, you're in deep trouble. Not at all. But it is to say if you aren't proactive, you're not giving yourself nearly as good of a shot to get to where you want to go as you otherwise could. There's no reason not to be. And the promotion of oneself is critical here, right? I said they don't promote themselves properly, okay? Part of that means don't let mom and dad do it for you, all right? And I have no problem with advisees I work with saying, hey, your parents are getting in the way. They're doing too much for you. I know you got a full plate. This has to stop. It's got to be you who's running your ship. And on that note, by the way, it's fine to get support from your parents. They're a big support system in this process, but they aren't the ones going to school for 4 years. And they aren't the ones that college coaches want to hear from. In fact, I can guarantee, factually speaking and from experience here, that if parents overstep their bounds in communications with coaches, it very well will get you it very well could get you X'd off recruiting lists, even if you're a good player, because they don't want to deal with mom and dad, and they're not sure if you want to be there. They're wondering whether or not it's just your dad or your mom who wants to be living vicariously through you. So athletically and physically, again, kids need to learn how to hone their skills, get to where they need to be athletically as a baseball player to be recruited. I always talk about push the ceiling of your options. Okay, so if you're a junior and it's February, okay, you still got 4 to 6 good months to go get bigger, faster, stronger, to get more recruitable. And you should want to be as recruitable as possible by August, September, October. That should be every kid's goal if you truly want to play college baseball. If you don't, okay, that's fine. You operate on a different path. If you do, you don't just snap your fingers and have it happen. Another reason most kids, another reason that some kids fall through the cracks that have the ability to play in college is they don't ask the right questions to college coaches. This is an area, and some of these are areas where, it's hard to know these things because it is so confusing and it is so overwhelming, and that's not a knock on parents and kids going through the process because they haven't gone through it before. But asking the right questions to college coaches can make the process so much easier. I know what I liked to be asked from recruits as a college coach and what I hated to be asked, and we'll explore that a little more in depth later on. But it was very important for me to, and I should say very rarely was I always asked the things I wanted to be asked, really smart, intelligent questions. Sometimes kids just talk about the weather or whatever, vague, or they have a list of 25 questions that they try to rattle off in one 8-minute phone call to me. That's not who I want to recruit. I want to get to know the kid. I want to get to know what motivates him. I want to get to know what's behind, those eyes that are looking at me. Does he have the desire? Does he want this? Is he asking questions that show me that he's really trying to gauge whether or not he wants to be in my program, or is he just asking questions to ask questions because he thinks he should? So a lot of different reasons, again, why there are stumbles in this recruiting process. You know, again, kids that have ability. And I'm thinking, you know, I've seen some kids in the past that I'm thinking that guy's a surefire Division I player. Find out 3 years later, he hung them up. Didn't happen. He thought it was going to happen. Had some missteps along the way. My own college recruiting process story, very briefly, before we go into the four major components of this process, it went like this. Okay, I was a high schooler in the early '90s. I had no idea about anything. I applied everywhere, all over the Eastern Seaboard. Had great grades, not very good SATs, but I played baseball and football. And it went like this: rejection, rejection, rejection times 6, one after the other, March and April. Applied regular decision everywhere. Very depressing early spring for me of my senior year there. So I really learned very early on that rejection is a part of this process. Somehow at the end of the day I got into Amherst basically because football had a lot of pull, and the baseball coach said, hey, if you can get in through football, great, all the power to you. But the point of that story, though, is this. Rejection is part of the college recruiting process. And I talk about it wherever I go because most kids today are not thick-skinned. Most kids today don't want to hear that they're not good enough or that they need to work on 7 specific things in their game if they're going to be able to be looked at as a true college player, or that they need to jump that 3.3 GPA to a 3.6 to be viable admissions options at X, Y, and Z schools. Rejection will happen inevitably from college admissions offices and from baseball coaches. Okay, that's the that's the realistic truth of it. But the good news is that so will acceptance. Okay, if you build a college list wisely, which means you have a combination of reach, fit, and safety schools, there will be some that don't like you. Maybe at the same level, there's some that love you. Part of that depends on roster need. Part of that depends on what a coach likes when he recruits in his eyes. There are tons of factors that can impact that. So you can't put yourself necessarily in a little box that says, I'm this, I'm that, because the bottom line is, you know, it may or may not happen for you, depending on the coach that's looking at you, okay? So, again, rejection happens, but so does acceptance. And if you build that list wisely, you're going to experience both of them. What I always tell kids is don't let rejection ruin you, because if you do, if you get that first rejection letter like I got probably 9 of my senior year in high school, and it buries you, you're missing the point here, okay? It's the kids that 9th and 10th, 11th grade are saying, hey, what do I need to do to get better? And if you got Phil Rosengren at Better Pitching or someone else who knows their stuff saying, hey, look, you want to be a college pitcher? You got to do this with your breaking ball. You got to be here with your command. You got to own the inside part of the plate, and you got to be throwing at X miles per hour on a consistent basis. Listen, get better, and go get it. Because there's nothing I like more than working with kids that once they know the truth and once they know what they're looking at objectively, they reach heights that they never thought, or I never thought they might be able to reach. And that happens time and time again once kids know what they're looking at, okay? So don't fear the rejection. Don't let it cripple you, all right? I started DCAT, also to help kids ensure that they maximize their college options through the process, by really attacking it the right way and not letting a punch in the face via rejection sink them. All right, so let's move on to this whole college recruiting process. A huge, huge thing we got here. It's very overwhelming, very confusing to many people most of the time, as I mentioned earlier. I kind of liken the process to 4 main components. And these are in no particular order, but we'll start with the baseball, okay? The baseball component of the recruiting process. I'm going to touch on a couple areas within each of these 4 components that you see on your screen. Many of you have already asked specific questions about certain areas within these, but I'm going to touch on them and, again, maybe expound upon a few in Q&A a little bit later on. first off, the baseball piece, skill evaluation, okay? In the recruiting process, you need to know what level you can play at. It's never too early to ask. If I'm a ninth grader and I know I love baseball more than anything and I want to play in college, and I have, again, a Phil Rosengren or someone objective that usually isn't dad or high school coach, sometimes can be, but it's someone who knows the game that can say, okay, look, you know what? You want to do this, first of all, you know, if you're a freshman or you're an early sophomore, like most, you need 20 pounds of good weight that will be added over time, and that will come. But skill-wise, what do you need to do? What specifically do you need to do with your feet in the infield, okay? So you need that objective analysis from someone who knows. But most kids, again, they fear rejection, and they don't want to go ask that question because they're afraid that they might not be good enough, and then they let certain people tell them for 3-4 years that, oh, you're great, you're the best thing since sliced bread, and you're going to play college baseball, when that person has no idea what they're talking about. And I'm not saying that, you know, all high school coaches, all dads don't in that regard, but more don't than do. And I think that's a pretty fair assessment. So once you have the skills evaluation from someone who knows, okay, yeah, you can play college, or right now you're not at a college level, and in order to get there, these are the specific things you need to do. The second thing you need is you need skill enhancement. Okay, I got the prescription from the doctor. What am I going to do about it? Okay, so here's the deal. When I was in high school, there weren't very many, you know, private factions, people that you could go to outside of high school that gave lessons that really knew the game. Now you have people, all of you listening, know Phil. He's a great resource. He's a guy who's going to get you better if you're a pitcher. Period, end of story. Chances are very good he's going to get you a lot better than the high school coaches in your area will. Because the simple, sad truth is that there aren't a lot of high school coaches in this country who can help you reach the level you need to in terms of your skills and really enhance them by what they teach. Okay? There are some incredible high school baseball coaches in this country, but a lot of times you do need to go outside of that, you know, whether it's an independent coach, whether it's a summer coach, and summer coaches are usually more focused on getting guys reps, getting guys in the games, not necessarily a whole lot of teaching, but that skill enhancement component is more readily available nowadays than it was 20 years ago for me. So use it. Find the people. Again, if you're listening to this right now, many of you guys are already working with Phil, which is great. But that's an area that a lot of kids just, okay, they kind of halfway it in that area, and it doesn't help them out. A couple other pieces of this baseball puzzle. I put nutrition and proper diet, lifting, and performance training in this category. How do I get bigger, faster, stronger? Let's go to nutrition for a second. Easily the most neglected part of the baseball puzzle. And you say, all right, why is nutrition a part of the baseball piece of the recruiting process? I'm a big believer that all these little elements affect the end game. And I believe that if you don't have a great diet and you don't have proper nutrition, which, by the way, 98% of high schoolers do not, or have anywhere close to a good diet, and I was no different when I was in high school. If you don't have that, you can't expect greatness in other areas. If you have an A-plus diet and you eat to fuel rather than eating to get by, just to get through your day, if you eat to fuel, you will have more energy, more stamina for your studies at 9 o'clock at night when you're exhausted from practice and lifting weights. But if you've eaten the right food, you're going to have more to put out. Likewise, I talk about nutrition before I talk about the weight room performance training, because anything you do in the weight room or performance training-wise, if you don't have the foundation, i.e. proper diet, in place, is a losing equation. I'm not a good math guy, but I know this. If your input, i.e. your nutrition and diet, doesn't at least equal or exceed your output, i.e. the millions of calories, not millions, but hundreds or thousands of calories that you're burning each day in your workouts and practice, etc., you're in trouble. You might as well not even go in the weight room if you're not going to eat breakfast, if you're going to just skate to get by or eating a Twinkie before practice or a Big Mac or whatever it is, because your body will hate you. Okay, and that's actually a fact. If your muscles aren't getting the proper oxygen, nutrients, nutrition, they will rebel as you work harder in the weight room. Some guys think, hey, I'm lifting 5 times a week and, an hour and a half each time. My first question, and they think that's awesome, my first question is, great, let me see your diet. Because if you're not putting in that input, what you're doing 5 days a week is actually really hurting you from a physical standpoint and making you take 10 steps back. So that aspect of the baseball piece to me is great. How do I get bigger, faster, stronger? That starts with what you eat and what you drink. Tons of water every day. I could go on and on about nutrition and diet, but we don't have that time in this call. Another last component, kind of the baseball piece, is the showcase preparation and event planning, okay? Showcases and camps. There's been several questions about this area that we'll get to a little bit later on, but it's really difficult nowadays with the saturated market in this area to know what to go to and what not to. One of the things that I do every year is I customize a master showcase and camp schedule for the summer, fall, winter, and then based on a student-athlete's baseball and academic profile, I make customized recommendations based on the camps out there that make sense for an individual to go to. Okay, everything says they're great. They get the big color flyers charging hundreds and hundreds of dollars for a 2 or 3 day event. There's only a few good ones. That's the truth. More and more are terrible. Some are very few are excellent, and there's a nice few handfuls that are kind of in the middle. But they don't all deliver on all the different components of what makes a showcase great, starting with exposure, organization, competition, etc. So again, I'll save some discussion on that for a couple of questions that I know center around showcasing, etc. But it is very important to know where to go showcase-wise, event-wise, as you prepare for your summer. Right now in February, I've already had my phone call discussions about June, July, and August events with my clients so that they can begin to organize the events they need to go to in conjunction with the summer ball that they're playing, okay? Academic piece of the process, okay? This is, I would argue, the most important part of the process, because here's the deal. You go to a certain event, such as a Head First honor roll camp up in Long Island. There will be 4 of them in August, every August. You go to that event, if you aren't academically strong enough, you get crossed off the list before you're even seen, okay? So it's really important to understand that the academic shouldn't be separated from the recruiting process. It should be completely included and understood that the better you do academically, the more college options you will have, plain and simple. Real GPA, okay? I always talk about, quote-unquote, real GPA. Why? Because everyone wants to talk about weighted and unweighted GPA. There's 3 GPAs, though, not 2. Okay? The weighted GPA is always the highest. What is a weighted GPA? It takes all your courses, and it factors in the weight of the APs and the honors courses, okay? Unweighted factors all your courses in, but it strips down the AP and honor courses without weighing them. So that's obviously a lesser GPA than the weighted. But the real GPA, especially at really strong academic schools with admissions, is the most critical, because what that does is it will strip away the AP and honor, the weighted. It's basically the unweighted. But what the unweighted does do that the real GPA won't do is the unweighted includes courses like PE, shop class, music, and art, all of which might be good for a well-rounded curriculum, but none of which matter to the Princetons and the Dartmouths and the Stanfords, et cetera, of the world, because they want to see the GPA in the 5 core courses, all right? Math, English, science, foreign language, and history, all right? So what you do in those 5 subjects, GPA-wise, is how you get your real GPA, which is always the lowest of the 3. Now, I always tell kids, you're going to a showcase or camp, you want to put the real GPA. Why? It's the whole dating game, okay? Let's say you go to a showcase in June. You've listed a 3.6 as your GPA in the little box that says what your GPA is. Well, inevitably, if a coach likes you, at some point he's going to ask you for your transcript to have that GPA and your courses analyzed by admissions to see if you can get into the school. Well, that 3.6, okay, might have been the weighted or even the unweighted, but it's not the real. It's not the average grade in those 5 core courses, so it's a little misleading. So a coach gets psyched about a 3.6, says, oh, this guy's awesome. He can definitely pitch for me. I can pull for him. And then he takes a transcript to admissions maybe a month and a half later when you guys are talking about visits, and it comes out to be a 3.32. Huge difference between that A- and that B+ potentially at certain schools. And maybe he comes back and says, look, sorry, I can't do anything for you even with my support and pull. Something we'll talk about a little bit later, the support and pull aspect. So I always say err on the side of being conservative with the GPA, because then there's no surprises at the end. You don't want to fall in love with the girl that you can't marry. That analogy applies to the relationship between coach and recruit as well, right? So in many coaches will do their job early, get the transcript so it's not an issue and it's analyzed before they, quote unquote, fall in love with you as a player so that they know it could happen if they wanted to, okay? By the way, APs and honors, I mentioned that. In terms of course scheduling, okay, I always get the question, are APs important? Should you take as many as are offered? AP and honors courses are very important on the transcript, okay? Now, you don't necessarily need 5 APs in a year, but what's important is that you're showing a strength of schedule that increases in its strength from 9th to 12th grade, with the underlying rule that you should never go backwards in strength of your schedule, i.e. from 10th grade. Let's say 10th grade you have 1 honors and 1 AP course. In 11th grade, you're thinking about dropping the AP and taking 1 honors. Bad mistake. In 11th grade, you should at least have 1 honors and 1 AP. Maybe think about adding another AP so it shows that increase. Okay, so when an admissions officer looks at a transcript, first thing they look at is they look at the school. Is it a good school, college, preparatory class? Does he have APs, honors, or whatever the most challenging courses at that particular school are? Or does he have a nice, strong schedule? If so, they check the box and say, okay, strong schedule. Then they strip it and they calculate the GPA and they start to see what the numbers are. Okay, so the AP honors do matter, but you don't need to go from 2 APs your junior year to 5 senior year just to do it. You just have to have that equally strong schedule the next year as you had the year prior, so that you don't raise any red flags. What they also want to see is they want to see the increase in performance as that increase in strength of schedule goes up, which is obviously the tough part for the student, but what most colleges will want to see. Is he continually challenging himself, and is he continually rising to it? Okay. Last thing to consider within the academic piece of this process, the last main thing, in my opinion, is, besides good grades and test scores, what do colleges want to see? And, when I applied to colleges, I thought that if I listed every event or camp or, opportunity club that was offered at school, it would boost my resume. But that's not at all what admissions offices want to see. They want to see passion. They want to see 1 or 2 things that you're really passionate about, or if you have 3 or 4, great. But they see through all of that nonsense. Now, there's so many recycled essays. You can find anything from Google here or there. They want to see real kids that have real passion about certain things, and that screams louder than any list of activities that might go on there. One of my passions was chess, believe it or not. So I had played a lot of chess, and I wrote my essay through the moves of a chess game, which in hindsight was horrendous writing, but the writing wasn't as important as what I was trying to convey through that essay in terms of my passion about chess, and that was one thing that helped me get into school. Okay, so SATs, SAT2s, ACTs, we can talk about that in Q&A if that should come up. But I want to move on to the recruiting piece very quickly. So we have the baseball component of the process, the academic component, and the recruiting component, which is the most vast by far, and that's where most of your questions, will needle into. But just to bullet point a couple areas of this process that are key. First, effective interaction with college coaches. I tell kids, if I'm advising you, I will teach you to walk the line between being persistent and annoying. You never want to be annoying and stray on that side, but you always want to be persistent or proactive, okay? You also need to vary the means that you communicate with college coaches via snail mail, email, whether it's phone or making visits. A lot of kids stick to one medium and they don't even do that well. Maybe it's email or maybe it's just the phone, et cetera. But learning how to effectively interact with college coaches is a big part of it. As we've talked about a little bit, a proactive behavior. It's absolutely necessary to be proactive, to market yourself properly, to promote yourself in a way that college coaches want to recruit, want to talk to you as they go through this process, or as you go through this process. I give the example when I was a recruiting coordinator at Boston College. The kiss of death for me was when my head coach, Pete Hughes, who's now at Virginia Tech, would say, Crocky, I want you to get on the phone, and I want you to call the California kids. Now, I'd have to be up at about 11 o'clock at night, Boston time, to get to those kids 3 hours earlier at 8 o'clock after all their stuff. And I dreaded it, not because the players weren't good, but because of the indifference I was met with. In other words, California kids play baseball year-round. Their skills are generally more polished than Boston area New England kids. But when I'd call, I'd usually get something like, I'd call up, Johnny, hey, this is Coach Cronk, Boston College. Did you get the letter I sent to you last week? And on the other end of the line, I hear something like, from where? Ma, did we get that letter from Boston College? And already I'm shaking my head, realizing I'm not calling this kid back. I got a kid just as good in my backyard in Lynn, Massachusetts, who eats nails for breakfast, who's tougher, who isn't going to ask me where Boston College is like a lot of those kids would, which is obviously self-explanatory. So I knew after that one call a lot of times I wasn't calling them back because they didn't even say something like, which is completely fine, Coach, I don't know anything about Boston College. Let me know. Teach me. Fine. Totally appropriate. But to say, I don't know, I've got some West Coast options, I'm never going to call that guy again because I've got a kid just as good as that kid, chomping at the bit in my backyard, ready to come to BC. And in that light, I always tell the kids that I coach, I work with, you're always compared to the kid that is, you always compare yourself to a kid that's being recruited who's just as good as you. There's one kid who does all the right things, interacts with college coaches effectively, is proactive, et cetera, and then there's a kid that waits for the process to come to him. And that kid who's proactive is going to win out every time in a college coach's eyes. Other components of the recruiting process. Video. I get the question all the time, is it necessary, does it help? Short answers, yes and yes. Timing of which is a different subject. I think we have some questions about, or a question about that a little bit later on. Visit types, unofficial versus official in the recruiting process. Official means that money is being given towards some portion of your trip, be it travel, be it nice meal at a restaurant, whatever it might be. And you only have 5 of those starting September 1st of senior year that you can make as a recruit. Unofficial visits, you have unlimited visits. It's all on your dime, okay? Gauging legitimate interest. It's not legitimate interest in the recruiting process if you get a camp letter from Florida, all right? However, a handwritten note from William and Mary saying, I love you at our camp, I like how your hands work, and you have a great arm, I think you can play second base, is legitimate interest. And there are many levels in between, obviously, but understanding what is legit interest and what is not is a big component of this recruiting piece, okay? And then learning how to leverage interest once you have it is really important in terms of furthering the process with certain schools. What do I mean by leveraging legitimate interest? Simply this. Every coach's favorite question is to ask a recruit, who else is recruiting you? Because if I'm a upper-level D1 school and I ask that question, I thought I saw a kid, maybe it was a really good day, I only saw him for 2 innings, and he's only getting D3 schools recruiting him, I probably overshot. I need to see him again, and I might not be interested. But if I'm a low-level D1 school, and I call a kid and I say, who else is recruiting you, and he's listing mid to upper-level D1 programs, I got to get in there with an offer or realize I have no chance. So they gauge that. The more schools that recruit, call, show interest in you, the better you are when you answer that question, because if you can't say that any schools have called, shown interest when a coach asks that question, you don't look as attractive to that coach. The million-dollar question in the recruiting process, how important is baseball and admissions? And the short answer is very important. In certain situations. In other situations, it's not important at all, because every single school in the country, D3, D2, D1, has a different amount of pull that they can yield for baseball players in admissions. The highly selective schools have a certain set of standards and criteria or system that they use, such as the Ivy, which uses the academic indexing system, or AI. It's very different school to school. But essentially, baseball, of course not to the degree of football or basketball, et cetera, can be critical in terms of helping with admissions. And if it can help you, great. Lastly, the research component of this process, really this is all about creating a college list wisely, right? Don't make your college list based on your ideal schools that all your buddies have talked about or that you've read the top 25 on U.S. News and World Report. And it's fine, by the way, if you're that good of a student, that good of a player, where you can have some of those. But create your list, research colleges that are in line with your priorities. Which schools are the most in line with your priorities, geographically, size-wise, in terms of playing time, coach's character, intended major. Kids really slip up in this area because they just kind of slop some names down on a piece of paper and say, that's my list, and they don't really look below the surface. Lastly, you got to have an open-minded attitude, stay organized, and communicate well in this process in order to have it really help you get to where you want to go. If you don't research, if you can't stay organized, I gave you the example, when I was at BC and the kid couldn't even take the letter out of the envelope and stay organized and know that BC had sent him something. It doesn't look very good. If you don't communicate well with coaches, they're not going to want to communicate with you. You're less likely to be recruited. And if you don't have an open-minded attitude as you research, in other words, you're thinking, I've got to be at this one or these 2 or 3 schools, you're going to cripple yourself, because if those don't work out, then you freak out, you panic, and you scramble, and that never leads to a good situation. But I wanted to talk very quickly about the 4 keys to maximizing the college recruiting process in sum. Number 1, assess yourself. As a baseball player, as a student, assess your skills and know where you stand, and then align your colleges in accordance with that. Number 2, research colleges thoroughly. Get below the surface. You want to maximize the college recruiting process? You got to research colleges thoroughly. That doesn't just mean look at a couple pictures online. It means take some visits. It means engage with admissions offices or professors or coaches to learn more about the school. Look at FIS Guide. Look at College Board. Research colleges thoroughly. Number 3, personalize, personalize, personalize. I mentioned earlier that colleges, admissions offices, they don't want recycled garbage on your application in terms of these are the 50 activities I've done. They want you to personalize your application by showing that you're passionate. Personalize your letters to college coaches. Never write, Dear Coach, comma, because that gets thrown in the trash. Take 2 seconds, look online, make sure you get the coach's name right, and then say, Dear Coach Aoki at Notre Dame, or whoever it might be. That is a personalized note to a coach. And number 4, have no regrets. All right? If you want to maximize this thing, go through this process having no regrets. Not everyone's going to be a straight-A student, and not everyone's going to throw 90-plus and be highly sought after by every school in the country. All right? But if you push yourself to do the very best you can in each area of the process, and thus to maximize your college options, you won't have regrets. You will look in the mirror at the end of the day and go, I gave it my all, and I am what I am as a player and as a student, and I'm happy with that. The worst thing is when you really know that you could have given more of an effort, and you get to the end of the road in fall of senior year, and you go, oh, man, that school really loves me, but I can't get in because I just didn't work hard enough. If I would have put that B+ or that B would have been an A- in those 3 or 4 classes, I might actually have this option that I really wanted so badly as a viable option. Okay? So 3 major pitfalls to avoid here in the process. Number 1, the couch potato effect. Don't sit back and wait. Okay, a lot of kids assume that coaches will find you and come to you. Huge pitfall of the process. All right, kids will sit on the couch, sit back and wait, and say, you know what, I'm a good enough player. They're going to come get me. As I've explained already in this webinar, ability is only part enough. Part of the process. And coaches, they really rarely come to high school games. And it doesn't generally matter what high school you attend. You know, I've worked with kids in high-profile high schools in Houston, Texas that, you know, are studs, and the fact that they went to that school in that area didn't end up mattering at all. What mattered was the coaches seeing him throw at a certain event, and that's how he got recruited. So critical to be proactive. Don't sit back and wait. Number 2, the too late pitfall, all right? Don't wait to engage in this process until your senior year comes, all right? You start looking at stuff August, September, senior year, going, okay, better get on it. In baseball, if you really want to play college baseball, you're too late, okay? Start developing a plan in your sophomore year, if possible, all right? Or definitely in junior year. That doesn't mean you need to create a college list your sophomore year, but you can focus on the academics, diet, performance training, specific baseball skills, events to attend, lots of things to focus on then that can really jumpstart your process. Okay? And last, don't carry an unrealistic opinion of your ability. Couple facts, less than 2% of high school players go on to play Division I baseball. Less than 2%. You also have to understand that less than a third of NCAA baseball programs, D1, D2, and D3, okay, less than a third are D1, and less than 20% of college programs, which include NAIA and JUCO, less than 20% of those are Division I. Okay, so there is great baseball, you know, beyond just Division I, which not a lot of kids give a whole lot of stock to all the time. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Phil. I know he has some questions that you guys have asked, and I will hope to provide some answers here.
Yeah, Jackson, that was great. And like you mentioned, we got a lot of questions from everyone out there, and I think you actually addressed a lot of them in your presentation. Really did a phenomenal job there. But I will go through and try to pick out the ones that maybe you could touch on a little bit more. Like just going down the list here of questions we got. There was someone asking for what a college coach is looking for when recruiting. I think you touched on that a lot. Academic performance, how does that factor into recruitment? I think you touched, really stressed how important that is. And also, I think online recruiting services, people were asking about that. If you want to expound on that a little bit, expand on that,
sure.
You can. I think I kind of know where you stand there, too.
Yeah, online recruiting services, I always say, look, if they're really cheap, you can have them, but generally speaking, if they're really cheap, they're going to be cheap product. Most of the, sometimes kids will want to put up, a website or a profile page with a video link, and that's fine, but it's really completely unnecessary to pay the money to have that done. So I'm not a big fan if kids feel the need to have them because they want the fluff and the look of it. That's fine, but there's zero import in terms of having it positively affect your recruiting process.
Just for people to kind of be aware of that. And then just being, that we're dealing with pitchers out there, mainly in parents of pitchers, there are a lot of questions about velocity and what coaches are looking for in terms of what pitches guys have. So I guess first, how important is velocity, do you feel?
Well, for a college coach, it's definitely important, but it is the most important thing when you look at a pitcher is pitchability. Now, I say I say that college coaches recruit with an ego, which means that the first thing they look at is, a lot of times, is the radar gun when a guy's on the mound. Yeah, you have to be at a certain velocity threshold, generally speaking, to pitch at certain levels. But the most important thing in the college game is for pitchers to miss barrels. And if a kid can pitch, i.e. has command of 3 pitches that he can locate in any count to either side of the plate, a lot of times that will transcend velocity. Okay, a guy, a right-hander throwing 80-83, at a showcase, the radar gun isn't lighting up for a mid-level Division I program, but maybe he shows he's able to come from a couple different arm slots, drop a nasty sinker off the table, and then has a nasty bender that moves to the other side, which has pinpoint control. You start to think beyond the radar gun a little bit, and you start to say, okay, this kid can flat out pitch. So, and I'm sure you're already, talking to your pitchers about this, Phil, but every pitcher should want to throw harder and gain more velocity, but not enough focus, I believe, at the high school level is placed on being a great pitcher and mastering your pitchability with all your pitches, fastball and your off-speed pitches as well. So it's important. You got to have it. You can't throw 68 and have 3 great pitches for strikes and expect to pitch in college. It's not going to happen. All right. But at the same time, I think there's an overemphasis placed on it, both by the recruit and by the college coach at the outset. Everyone loves a guy that lights it up. But look, when I was a D3 head coach, I was hoping, a lot of times I wouldn't see the 85, 87 at a showcase because that meant I had no chance of getting them. So those D3 type coaches or the smaller level program guys have to recruit with better goggles where they come in and they say, okay, I get that he might not have velo, but can he pitch? And most importantly, can he win? Last quick point here. Yes, what is a college coach looking for when recruiting? I always ask that question when I go all over the place. I get lots of good answers: hard work, hustle, good grades, etc. All of those intangibles, yes, they all go into one word, and that's a winner. And as a pitcher, you got to have a bulldog out there, and you got to recruit a guy who smells blood, who will compete, and who will go win on the mound, velocity or not.
Definitely. Awesome points right there. And I actually got an even more specific question about what should fastball velocity be for a left-hander. On that topic, I pitched played with a guy in the Indians organization who played D1 ball, and I don't expect that he was highly recruited to pitch in college. I'm not sure if he was a walk-on. He was an undrafted free agent with the Indians, but he threw maybe 80. He was literally 77 to 81 lefty who just had outstanding command of his fastball and a phenomenal changeup, and he just dealt. And so that's really, if you can command, sometimes even just 2 pitches, if you can really command your pitches and move them around.
Absolutely.
You're fighting a little bit of an uphill battle if you don't have the velocity because you don't grab the attention of guys all the time. But if you can pitch, guys will notice and they'll pay attention.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, what you just said, Phil, and I agree. Jamie Moyer, classic example, right? I think he was hitting about 78, 79 on the gun through 20 years in the bigs for at least, 10 teams, and he had a fastball and a changeup, unbelievable changeup, and he won because he located. And look, lefties are at the top of the totem pole, at the top of the food chain in the recruiting process, obviously. So if you got a lefty who knows what he's doing, velocity is less significant. Like you said, it's nice, but there are guys who have had, fastball changeup pitchers who have had really long big league careers even with 0 velocity. So, again, I think mastering that pitchability should be at the forefront of pitchers' minds first, and the velocity will come, and there should be a throwing program and a training program to develop that, with whatever lessons are going on.
And I heard you talk about video and the importance of video. Got a question here. Should pitchers video their outings and send them to recruiters? So I guess maybe more specifically, how often should they be sending video? Should they just be posting it to YouTube and sending it? How would they go about that?
Well, it's a great question, and I don't like video to go too often to coaches. First thing you want to do is make sure before it's being sent to a coach, is that you're in the ballpark of recruitability. In other words, my general rule is the recruiting video, i.e. the one that really matters the most in the process, shouldn't go out, and this is very grossly generalized here, shouldn't go out until June through August after junior year, okay? And the reason for that generally is because most kids aren't nearly as physically developed as they need to be before they show themselves on that ever-important video. Now, there are certain kids that, going in maybe midway through sophomore year are hosses. They're physically developed. They have the stuff to show. Absolutely. Show one sophomore year. The good thing about being a pitcher is that, to me, it's the easiest video to shoot. I like 4 views as a college coach. And on that note, you can waste $600, $700, $800 to all these things. They'll show like 2 pitches from one angle. If I'm a coach, I want to see behind the mound to see the stuff. The flight of the ball. Boom. Pop. First 40 seconds, popping. I see all the movement. I see the stuff. I want to see behind the catcher to see what it looks like to the batter. Then I want to see the mechanical view right on the chest, a few pitches to see what the mechanics look like. And then fourth, I want to see the view that is, if I'm a right-handed pitcher, camera's basically facing the mound on the third base side, roughly halfway between the pitcher and catcher, so I can see the mechanics coming right towards me, not the side view mechanics. If a pitcher is physically developed enough and interest has been shown by a coach and a video is specifically requested, I have no problem with that. But what I do see often is too many kids prematurely send videos to coaches that are just going to be like, dude, I'm not even going to look at this until you put on the weight and become more physical than you already are. Or they aren't at a certain level with their command and their pitchability. And that's where you need a guy like you to help them say, all right, you're not ready yet. Keep working. Let's show when. And then you get the argument, well, what if I show the improvement? Well, again, I don't want a 130-pound kid showing himself on the video if I know with the right program he's going to be 160 in 9 months. So I kind of come at it from that regard. There are several kids I work with that will send maybe one at the beginning of a spring, end of a summer, couple 2 or 3 intervals, because I'm comfortable with where they're at. So it's not a question you can answer exactly, I don't think. I think it really depends on the individual.
Okay. Those are all really good points, though, just for people to think about in terms of when to send, what to send, and kind of giving that inside look at what coaches are actually looking for is awesome. And that kind of ties into another question we got here, which is when is a good age to start contacting college coaches?
Again, here I say it depends on ability, but generally summer after sophomore year, right before junior year, August, September of junior year, is a good time to reach out because you want to have 2 full years of an academic body of work under your belt kind of before you start reaching out. And largely, coaches aren't focused on sophomores unless you're really, really good and you're a high-profile guy. That's why I say it depends on ability. I work with a kid in Florida who's a big 227-pound lefty as a sophomore, and he's throwing 81, 83 with nasty stuff. He's going to be throwing 88 to 92 because he's got a great pitching coach in a year and a half. I want that kid basically operating on a junior year platform when it comes to communicating with coaches. But generally, in earnest contacting coaches, usually, right around the start of junior year or a couple months before, or if you know you're going to go to, let's say you finish your sophomore year, you're going to go to a July showcase. I always think it's a good idea to email about a week in advance of the event to say, hey, Coach, just want to let you know I'm interested in your school. I'm going to be at the event, and I look forward to being in touch. And the reason is that coach, and I know this from experience, will print that email out and say, I got to make sure I check this kid out. Anyone who emails prior to the event will always get that printout stuck in a folder before the coach goes to the event, assuming they are organized and do their job right, so that they make sure to get an extra eye on that kid who reached out to them in advance. But the hardcore, in earnest reach out to me right around the start of junior year.
Okay.
Generally.
And how about the events there? How important is it, that was another question we got, how important is it to attend baseball showcases and camps, and how do you tell which ones are worth the time and money, and how do you maximize their effectiveness?
Loaded questions. We'll start with the easy one. How important is it to attend baseball showcases and camps? What we're talking about there is exposure. In showcases and camps are where you get the exposure that you need in order to see whether or not you're good enough to be recruited. So it's very important. However, to me, how important those are depends on how old you are in the process, okay? Rising seniors, June, July, August, right before your senior year, by far the three most important exposure months, okay? On average, nowadays, outside of summer ball events, kids need to go to roughly 3 to 6, depending on any number of factors, showcases or camps, to get the proper exposure, okay? Now, if you're a rising junior, 1, maybe 2 is plenty, and a lot of kids overdo it. If you're a rising sophomore, you don't even necessarily need to go to any, depending, again, on your physicality, your projectability, and some other things, which hopefully you've had someone objectively tell you where you stand so you know what to do. So, to me, how important they are, yeah, they're important, but when they're important is the bigger question. How do you tell which showcases are worth your time and money? Well, DCAT. That's a $1 million question because, it's such a saturated predatory industry now. There are a million showcases that pop up, and the hardest part of my job, quite frankly, is recommending to kids good events to go to because 80% of them are terrible, and 10% are okay, and 10% or less are great. So it's very difficult, again, to know which showcases are worth time and money. Here's what you got to understand. What they will all tell you is that their event is great for every player. That's a bull-faced lie. No event is right for everyone. No event is right for everyone, okay? It's just not the case. The key is to know which events are right for me based on my academic and athletic profile. All right, because again, it makes you notice that. Let's say, all right, area code games, East Coast Pro Showcase, Select Fest. These are all really good events. East Cobb tournament in July in Marietta, Georgia. Great events in terms of the competition and the number of coaches, but if you go to the East Cobb event with your team, it's all prestigious and all, but there's dozens of fields, there's hundreds of coaches. Most of the kids are, mid to upper level D1 guys, and if you're not a guy who's a standout guy, there might be all these coaches there, et cetera, but you might not even really get seen like you would in a 120 kid camp or showcase where you're going to stand out like a sore thumb because you're better than most of them. So you got to know, you got to look at, all right, based on what I'm looking at, what are the best events for me, okay? If you're an academic kid, hands down, Head First Honor Roll Camp is the best in the country. You go to one, you know that. And if you do go to one of those, then you unfortunately measure all others against them, and they all pale in comparison because those guys get it on all fronts. And when I was working there, I mean, it's exposure, yes. It's instruction, yes. It's good competition, yes. But it's also the ability to really intermingle with the coaches and make some headway in terms of your communication with them. Get to know them a little bit as coaches. They get to know you a little bit as players. How do I maximize their effectiveness? I always say one thing you got to understand is that perfection is not possible at these things. And a lot of kids go into them and they say, all right, I got to be perfect. They put so much pressure on themselves, and they feel like if they're not perfect, they won't be recruited. They don't understand that projectability trumps perfection in every case, at every showcase. All right, ball goes through the wickets at shortstop. Are you written off a list? No. Happens twice. Are you written off a list? No. They want to know what's your arm strength like, what's your speed like, what are your 5 tools, right? Can you hit? You have a good swing. You hit for power. Can you play defense? And they will be able to gauge that at most showcases, as they see you play. So how do I maximize the effectiveness? I can say this. I tell every kid, you are wasting your time time and money and effort at an event if you don't get some feedback from coaches in events where you can actually talk to coaches. I should say really quickly that a showcase per se is by definition means that coaches are not employed to work the camp, have to sit in the stands, and there can be no interaction with them. Okay? The best way to maximize those events is to, if you make a mistake, you keep on going. You don't show any bad body language, any negativity. You play hard, and you get the most out of it, and you don't let them focus on any of your negativity. You forget it so that they forget it. But if more and more of them now are interactive, where coaches are a part of the event, so you can interact with them, and in those cases, to get the most out of them, you need to ask for that honest assessment. For example, you're on a field with a coach who's coached you for a game or two. You're about to leave the camp. I say go up to them and say, don't start by saying, hey, can I play in your program? The question I always like kids to ask is, hey, you've seen me now for a game or two. I'd love to know what you think I can do to work on to improve my skills, okay? Because by asking that question, you show that you're coachable and that you want to get better and that you don't just assume, like many naive high schoolers, that you can play in any one program, all right? And the cool thing is usually when that question is asked, it's met on the other end by the coach with the things they like about your game first, right? You're going and saying, basically, what are my weaknesses and how do I improve? And a lot of times the first thing you hear is, well, hey, man, I really like how you run the bases. You got great backhand technique deep in the hole, and you got great bat speed. You know, you got some things here. And then they remember the question and go back to, you know, hey, these 4 things, you know, I really think you need to work on, you know, over the next few months, et cetera. So then the kid leaves having some, well, and that can, you can also ask the question if you feel right, you know, based on what you've seen, am I a guy that you know, might have a shot to play at your program? Now, most coaches might not be able to give you an answer on the spot, but, you know, some might give you an indication, yes or no, or maybe, of where you might stand. And then you've left and you have maybe 3 or 4 things from a college coach, in addition to what you've been hearing from all your other coaches, that you can go work on and apply to make yourself more recruitable. And that is extremely valuable to the player, and it gives that interaction that you need to have in this process.
Jeff, I think we got time for one more question here.
Okay.
We've answered pretty much all of them, or gotten to pretty much all of them. The few that we haven't, we'll see what we can do about that. But don't want to go too long here. We've definitely been very thorough and covered a lot of ground. Really getting a lot of great information tonight. So just as a final question, got a couple questions actually from people about sort of the difference between high school baseball stats and summer travel ball stats. So kind of how important are your high school baseball stats versus your summer or travel team stats? And then they got one guy who asks, what if your son or a player only plays for a travel team and doesn't actually play on the high school team? How is that looked at by college?
All right. Well, the first question, I'm going to kind of rephrase the question to some degree because, well, I will make this statement. Okay, the question again, how important are high school stats versus summer stats? The first thing to know is that stats aren't as important as most people think. They're very irrelevant in many cases. That does not mean they're wholly unimportant, but there is far too much emphasis placed on statistics, mostly by parents, also by players, and largely by high school coaches, etc. The bottom line is stats may or may not indicate a little something here or there to a college coach. They want to see a player with their own eyes to make a determination. Kids are so result-oriented nowadays, a lot of times, too result-oriented, and so singularly focused on a stat that they forget to understand. Look, the bottom line is kids that play New York high school baseball are different than kids that play California, Texas, or Florida high school baseball for the obvious reason, right? Nothing they can do about it. But the leagues in the competition in California, say, are far better than those in New York because they're playing year-round, generally speaking, so on and so forth. So if a kid hits 300 in California versus 300 in New York, most coaches will assume, you know, there's definitely a difference, even though the stat says there's no difference, right? It's harder to do that in California in that league, et cetera. So stats can be very misleading, and that's why college coaches don't usually focus on them. Now, they might, for a pitcher, obviously strikeouts versus walk ratio is big, ERA is big, but if a kid goes, 9-0 and he's pitching against, guys that, a bunch of teams that aren't that good, again, that's misleading. They want to know maybe a couple stats. In some cases, some coaches might be more stat radish, where they want to know a few more than others. But by and large, coaches will say, okay, that's a nice indicator. He did this or that, and then they drop it and they want to see the kid play. Because again, there's so many variables in terms of the competition, the league you're playing in, so on and so forth. So, what high school versus summer stats, it doesn't really matter, right? I mean, again, the big question is how good is the team in comparison to the competition, and is what you're doing an accurate measure of your ability? And that's very tough to determine in both cases most of the time. So many summer teams don't even keep stats, which is fine. Don't worry about it. And some high school teams don't keep stats. Don't worry about it. Don't be the guy who's focused so much on your stats that you lose sight of the fact that on the college recruiting process totem pole, in terms of what's important, it's way, way, way down there.
All right.
Nice. Let's see. Was there? And then you asked about if a player only plays travel ball and doesn't play high school ball, how is that considered? It's an interesting question. I worked, speaking in California, many years ago, I worked with a kid in Northern California who lived in the mountains who, long story short, had a really bad high school experience. Could fly, he was like a 6'5" runner. I had seen this kid at a camp. Great athlete, tailback, just didn't have much baseball polish. But there was no question he could run down a ball in the outfield. There's no question he could steal a million bases, and he had good bat speed. I knew he could play college, and he said, look, junior year, I really don't want to play high school ball for numerous reasons, but I've got a good summer team, et cetera. Is that okay? The bottom line is high school ball doesn't really ultimately matter that much. And I would even say that summer ball is nice too, but what matters is getting to the right events with the right coaches seeing you. So, I said, look, it's not ideal because if you're not playing in your junior season, you're not getting the reps that are nice, but exposure-wise, it's a non-issue. So if you train, if you get to good instructors, you maybe play some pickup games here or there to keep your batting eye alive, you'll be fine. Ultimately, he went on to play in college because we got him to the right events and showcases, and he played on a good summer team. So it's not the end of the. Don't get me wrong here. I'm not espousing that the kids should not play high school ball. But at the same time, in the very rare instances where, it might not happen, it's also not the end of the road in terms of the recruiting process. And college ball still can be an outcome if high school ball is not played for a season or two.
Okay, good stuff. Justin, we should probably wrap it up there. Really good presentation, and really got out a lot of great information here. I'm sure people found it really helpful. So Justin, just want to say, again, great job, and thanks so much for taking the time. I know guys are going to get a lot out of this, so really appreciate you taking the time and joining us today.
Absolutely. Happy to do it, and thanks a lot for having me, Phil. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, you got it, Justin. And guys, like I said, I hope you found this webinar helpful. I hope all of your questions got answered, but if you have any follow-up questions at all, I'm going to go ahead and link up all of Justin's information below the replay here on the website when I get it up. So you can always, you should have all of his information to reach out to him, and you can always email me directly at phil@betterpitching.com. So again, thanks again for joining us, and have a great night.